So, I haven't really done very many wrap-ups so far this month. I'm really falling behind on those, so here we are. The first 5 books that I read in the month of June, I did a reading challenge for, so I'm not going to be wrapping those up in this video, but if you're interested in hearing about those first 5 books, you can go and watch that reading challenge vlog up in the corner. And I'm actually splitting, I always split up my wrap-ups, but because I've fallen a little bit behind, this wrap-up is going to be the next 5 novels that I've read, and then I'm going to have a separate wrap-up for the 3 manga and graphic novels that I've read so far this month. So that one will be coming your way very, very soon, and then if I manage to finish more before the end of the month, then I may do another wrap-up, or otherwise I'll just do my statistics wrap-up and let you know if there are any additional books that I have read. So for this one, I am going to jump right into the books that I've read. So the first book I'm going to talk about is Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell, which was actually our book club's book for this month. This follows predominantly Kath and her sister Ren as they go to university. They are twin sisters, they've been inseparable all of their lives, they do absolutely everything together, but Ren has a very extroverted personality and Kath, who is our POV in this story, is very introverted, and she enjoys writing fan fiction for this series called the Simon Snow series, which is very reminiscent of Harry Potter, and she writes fan fiction. She's actually really successful at it, but that's really all she wants to do. She doesn't want to go out partying like her sister Ren does and meeting boys and all that kind of thing. So we follow her life at college as she deals with making friends, as she deals with the changes in her relationship with her twin sister, as she deals with being away from her dad. There are trigger warnings for all sorts of mental health conditions in here, so do check those trigger warnings out if you are interested in this one. There's been a variety of feelings within the book club about this particular book, but I think that the common consensus is that this is a very light and easy book to read. It's not particularly deep. The portrayal of Kath's anxiety is quite surface level and generic. The diversity isn't great, but it's just a fun, light, contemporary read that I personally found was a really good break from some of the heavier things that I had been reading, so I really enjoyed that for this reason. But it's definitely not, it's the kind of story that could have been hard-hitting contemporary, but that's not the direction that the author went in with this one, and really this is the kind of read that you pick up if you want something very light, easy, not particularly deep, as I said, and you want something to just take up a little bit of space in your mind but not require too much in-depth thought. And for that reason I really enjoyed it. I think the timing of me picking this one up really helped with that as well. I needed something like this at the time that I read it, so it was perfect for me, but just don't go into it expecting anything groundbreaking, because I definitely don't think it's that. Next I read We Set the Dark on Fire by Taylor K. Mejia, which is a fantasy dystopian style YA story. We live in a world where the higher classes get married in groups of 3. So there's 1 man and there's 2 women. And it's not really a polygamous relationship type of situation, because the primera, which is the first wife, her role is to support the husband and manage his public facade and be his in-public wife and sort of manage his business, as it were, the business being him as a person, whereas the segunda, the second wife, is the wife that will have and raise the children and somewhat run the more traditional type portions of the household. So she'll be responsible for like serving the food, whereas the primera will be responsible for hiring the household staff and managing their employment and things like that. So we follow Daniela, who is a primera, but she has sort of tricked her way into this position, and she's not from a portion of society that would usually become a primera. And then this group called La Voz sort of recruits her as a spy. And I think that that's all I'll say about the premise of this one, but I actually enjoyed this an unexpected amount. I expected to like this one, but I didn't expect to enjoy it quite as much as I did. I really enjoyed Dani as a character and I liked the world. I do like dystopian stories anyway, so that's not necessarily particularly surprising, but I did really enjoy the story. I became invested. This is a duology and I definitely want to pick up the second one. The character work in here was really, really good. I think some elements of the plot were pretty predictable, but they were still enjoyable. Even though I sort of saw a lot of the twists coming, I still enjoyed watching them unfold, and I still sort of enjoyed thinking, oh Dani, how can you be so blind to what's going on? It's so obvious. It's obvious to the reader, but it's clearly not obvious to the characters because they're very, well, Dani is quite smart and street smart in some ways, but also quite naive and forgiving in others. So I really, really enjoyed this one. Again, it's quite an easy read. I think because a lot of it is quite predictable, it's not so edge of your seat intense, but again, that's enjoyable in some ways because you can just enjoy the reading experience rather than feeling really stressed out by what's happening on the page. So I really, really enjoyed this one. Next up, I read Pet by Akwaeke Emeze, which is quite a short book. It's still a novel, but it's only 200 pages long, so I won't say too much about what this one is about, but we follow a character named Jam, who is a trans woman, and, well, she's a teenager at the point of the story, but you know what I mean. And she encounters a creature who enlists her to help it find a monster in a world where monsters are no longer supposed to exist. And the story kind of poses the question of what is a monster and what is an angel. And I really enjoyed this story. It's quite interesting because you could read it as though it's a fantasy, or you could read it as magical realism, or you could read it as contemporary with lots of metaphor and symbolism. So it really challenges the genres that are in here. Again, I don't want to say too much about it because of how short it is. I find it really difficult to review short books because I don't want to spoil anything, and I feel like half of the enjoyment of this story is just going along for the ride and discovering everything as it comes up, because you just get through it so quickly. I read and listened to the audiobook of this, in which I've actually done that with all of the books that I'm going to mention in this particular video, and I especially enjoyed the narration for this. I found that it definitely made the experience more immersive, and it really brought the author's authorial voice and style even more to life, so I definitely recommend listening to the audiobook if you can. I really enjoyed reading it that way, but this was one of those stories that I feel like could have gone either way for me, because it really challenges that genre and it walks the line between contemporary magical realism and fantasy. It's the kind of thing that I really could have disliked, but the way that the author executed that mixture really worked for me here. Then I read Opposite of Always by Justin A. Reynolds, which is also kind of genre bending. So this is a contemporary story. It's very much written in a contemporary sort of style, but there is one science fiction element in that. There is time travel. So in this one, we follow Jack, who meets Kate at a party, and they fall in love. But then Kate dies, and Jack finds himself stuck in a time loop trying to save her life, whilst also helping and preserving the relationships that he has with his friends and with his parents as well. And I think one thing I've learned from reading this book is that I actually don't like the whole Groundhog Day trope. I find it frustrating. I like to see characters dealing with their problems and progressing rather than getting a do-over. But I still really enjoyed this book. The relationships in here were really great. Again, this is one where I really benefited from listening to the audiobook because the narrator really added to the authorial voice. There's a lot of American type slang used in this particular book, and being from the UK, if I had read it in my mind with my English accent, because I do sub-vocalise when I'm reading, it probably would have come off really cringy, because that kind of thing just doesn't sound right in a British accent. So I think that listening to it on audiobook really added to the experience for me. If you're an American reader, that might not matter quite so much, but personally for myself that really worked for me. The book really spends a lot of time thinking about and looking at what big changes can happen as a result of very seemingly small decisions that a person will make, and how that sort of butterfly effect filters out into the world and changes things dramatically and drastically. So that was a really interesting way to, that time travel element was a really interesting way to explore those ideas. Like I said, that trope isn't necessarily my favourite, but I still really enjoyed this book. I still really liked the characters and felt for them. I really was rooting for Jack to save Kate so that they could be together, because their relationship seemed really pure and lovely, and the author chose not to focus too much on the development of that particular relationship. Actually, although that was the relationship that Jack was striving throughout the book to rescue, we actually spent a lot more time working on the relationship between Jack and his friends and Jack and his parents, which I actually really enjoyed. It made, if there had been too much focus on that relationship with Kate, then it would have made the story even more repetitive and difficult to enjoy. So I really liked the way that the emphasis was very slightly different in each iteration, and like I said before, we had that look at how small decisions can have a massive impact on things, and you may not expect them to have that kind of result. So I definitely think that this is an enjoyable one. It's much more intense of a read than some of the others that I've mentioned, but I definitely recommend it. And then finally I read The Lost Queen by Signe Pike, which was a book that was sent to me by Deborah. Thank you once again, Deborah. This is a historical fiction novel, and it's kind of an Arthurian legend retelling of sorts, but with a very, very different focus. So often when you're reading or watching a retelling of the legend of King Arthur, you're focused either on King Arthur's perspective or on Merlin's perspective. But here we are following the perspective of Merlin's sister, who is someone lost to history. This, I said when I posted that this was my current read on Instagram, that it really feels like it's a quiet story, and it really feels like you are sat in a field surrounded by fog and you are watching the story play out in the mists. That's really the only way I can describe the feeling of reading this book. It's very, very atmospheric without being overly descriptive. So other books that are similarly atmospheric in my view are Strange the Dreamer by Lanny Taylor and The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern, but they achieve that atmospheric feeling through lots of world building and lots of purple prose, whereas this book doesn't have that. There is no purple prose in my opinion, and there isn't a whole lot of time spent on building the world. There is some, but that's not the focus. The focus is on the characters. This is an incredibly character-driven story, so we are very focused on the characters. We're very focused on the relationships between those characters and how those relationships impact upon the world. And a lot of the strife in this story is politically based, which I personally quite enjoy, but if you are not a fan of political based plot lines, then this might not be specifically for you, especially if you're also not a character driven reader. This is a very, very character driven book, which works really well for me because I'm a character driven reader. I do personally recommend the audiobook for this one. This is based in Scotland and a lot of the names are, well, all of the names are Scottish. So our protagonist is named Langoreth, and we have characters like Lilachan and Ruthak, but they're not spelt phonetically. So if you're not Scottish or you don't speak Celtic, then I would suggest the audiobook. I think that it makes the reading experience much easier, and it's really nice because the narrator is also Scottish. So it adds to that atmosphere and it adds to that authenticity in my opinion. So I really enjoyed reading it that way. I don't really want to say too much about what happens in this story because, like I said, the plot is not the focus, and I just don't want to say too much about what happens, but I really enjoyed the characters in here, and it is going to be a trilogy. The second book is out in September or October, I think, and I will definitely be picking that one up as well. I'm interested to see what happens in Langoreth's life. I think this book was a single perspective. We were completely from Langoreth's perspective, but I believe from reading the synopsis for book 2 that there is actually going to be multiple POVs in the rest of the series. So I'm really interested to see that dynamic unfold as well. And that's it. Those are the next 5 books that I read in the month of June. Let me know if you've picked up anything that you've particularly enjoyed or particularly disliked in the month of June so far. Do leave your recommendations down below, and as always I will have my links for all of the ways that you can support the Black Lives Matter movement down in the description box as well. And that's it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video and want to see more like this from me, then do think about hitting that subscribe button, and I hope to see you here again soon. Thanks, bye!